Hi there, fellow bookworm. Back in 2020, I bought my first Kindle and it was the best investment I've ever made. But it took me months and months to figure out and understand how to use this thing. And I can only imagine for someone buying a Kindle today, with all the new software updates, what the experience must be like to learn how to use a Kindle. If you're a new Kindle owner, or maybe you've already had a Kindle for quite a while now, but you're just feeling overwhelmed or not feeling like you're using the Kindle to the best ability possible, this video is for you. I'm going to do a full tutorial walking through the Kindle and how to use all the main features of the device, but I have a very special announcement before we talk about that. Today is a very important day for me. I just released my first book called Supercharge Your Reading. This is a very short book that teaches people how to use a Kindle to read more books and remember the stuff they learn in the books they're reading. Now you'll see in this video I'll be talking about quite a few different features of using a Kindle, but simply put, there are more valuable features than others, and those valuable features are the ones I dive really deep into in the book Supercharge Your Reading, and I really wanted to take the time to explain those so you get the most value out of your Kindle. The book is very, very short. You can finish the whole thing in under an hour, and I also talk about more important things like the mindset I have regarding reading books every single day in my lifelong pursuit of learning. Those are the things that really matter when it comes to reading on a Kindle, and that's what I talk about in the book. If you're interested in the book, link down below in the description. Right now it is launch week, so it is on sale. This is the best price it will be, but honestly this was a really fun project to work on, and I can't wait to write even more books about Kindles in the future. Anyways, for this video, if you want to watch the whole thing through, you're more than welcome to do that, but if you want to watch a very specific section, I'll have chapter markers linked down below as well, so you can skip around to the parts that are most relevant to you. Alright, there is a lot to cover, so let's get started right now. The first thing I want to talk about is the home screen of the device. Now, if you have trouble setting up the device before you get to this point, I have a whole video that walks through the setup experience. I'll leave a link for that right now down below and on the screen, but I'll be talking about the home screen right now, which is after the initial setup. Once you're on the home screen, you're going to see two different tabs over here, the home tab and the library tab. Now, personally, I do not like the home tab very much. You'll see it is completely cluttered with different books, some books that you may have bought yourself and other books that Amazon is trying to recommend to you that you may be interested in buying. But for me, I don't like seeing all these recommendations on my home screen. I prefer to only see the books that I actually have purchased myself. And for that, you have to go to the library tab on the bottom right. The cool thing that Kindle does is once you press on this library tab, it will remember that setting, and every time you go back home, it will go to this library tab and not the home tab, which is very nice. There's no current way to disable the home tab completely, but at least it remembers library tab is where you left off. You'll see in the middle between the home tab and the library tab a little book cover over here, and that book cover will be the last book that you are reading. It's a bit of a shortcut to open that book back up. Now I want to spend a bit of time in this library tab because it's really important if you have a lot of books that you keep it organized and you know where your books are. The really cool part is they have filters to help you do this. On the top left of the library tab, you're going to see this little menu option for filters. You'll see all the filters that are available to you. Now on the first tab over here, we have the status section. You can show your downloaded books, your unread books, or your read books. For me, I like to choose downloaded and unread. I don't want to see books that aren't downloaded on my Kindle. I also don't want to see books that are already read. I only want to see stuff that's downloaded and unread. Below this, we have another section for the type of books that you want. Now, your Kindle supports more than just books. It'll support documents, book samples, Audible books, comic books, news. All of these things are different categories of documents you can put on your Kindle. Chances are that you may only read one of these categories. You don't have any of the other ones. So for me, I just like to choose books, and now I only see books on my Kindle. The good thing about this is it'll take out all your Audible books. I do listen to Audible books quite often, and those would show up on my home screen if I don't choose this book option. This definitely helps reduce the number of things I see on my home screen. On the bottom over here, we also have two more options for library loans and prime reading. These are both options for books that you don't technically own, but you could be borrowing from Amazon Prime or your local library. That is why you can choose those separately so you know which books are yours and which ones aren't. Now that we have these filters selected, let's go back into the library tab that we were talking about before, and we'll see the list has been reduced quite a bit. I no longer have an endless scrollable page of books. I have a much more manageable view of the books that are unread, downloaded, and are only the book format. Now say for example, I purchased a book on my computer, but it was not sent to my Kindle. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but what that means is I own the book, it's in the cloud, but it's not downloaded on my Kindle. You can actually very quickly remove one of your filters by pressing the X next to the filter on the top of the status bar over here, and that will remove that filter from the view, and now you see all my undownloaded books as well, which can be very handy for a quick access to that. Now, opposite of the filters menu, we also have the views menu. Now this is very useful if you don't want to see all these giant book covers. You can quickly change it to a list view, and now you'll see a nice list format of all your books, which might be more useful for some people. Also in this menu, you can change the way everything is sorted. If you want to change it by alphabetical or most recent or ascending or descending, I like to keep it on most recent descending. What that means is every time I open up a book, it just kind of brings it back to the top of the list. So sometimes I open up books that I want to read that I started several weeks ago. I tap on the book and it jumps back to the top of the list. So I always want to see the most recent things on the top. On the bottom, we also have an option for collections. If you want to take the time to categorize your books into different topics, you can do that. You'll see here that I have a self-publishing option over here, our collection that I made for books on this topic of self-publishing. When I was writing my book, I bought a bunch of other books about publishing a book for the first time, and this was really helpful to collect those books into one collection. All right, let's actually open up a book now and try reading on a Kindle. This is probably why you bought your Kindle. Let me show you how to do that. Just tap on the book that you want to open, and you'll be brought to the introduction or the first chapter of the book. Now, changing pages on a Kindle is very straightforward. If you tap on the right side of the screen, you change to the next page, and tap on the left side of the screen, you'll go back a page. You could also swipe right or left, and that will actually be independent of where you're tapping on the screen. So you can actually go to the next page on the left side of the screen by swiping instead of tapping. So if you're holding it in one hand, that could be a useful tip. Now, if you want to see the settings while you're reading a book, this is a bit different than other e-readers. You actually have to tap on the top of the screen. If you tap anywhere in the middle or the lower half of the screen, it'll just turn the page. But if you want to see the settings, you have to tap on the top section of the screen. You'll see the status bar drop down. And again, if you want to remove the settings, just tap anywhere else on the screen on the bottom half, and the settings will go away. When you have the settings menu up on the top over here, you'll see the library back arrow button on the top left. This will bring you back to your home screen. It's the only way to go back to your home screen, so that's really important to know how to do that. On the right side, the first icon that we see is the AA icon. Now, this is a very important icon because this is where you'll be doing all your book customizations. The first tab over here is for themes. The cool thing about Kindle is you can actually save different presets depending on what settings you have. So if you want to customize things and save them as a new theme, you can do that. They have some pre-built themes for you to choose from. If you want a compact view or a larger view, you can choose that. But personally, I like to customize it to my own liking. The next tab is for font options. This is where you choose all the important stuff like your font size, the boldness, or the actual font itself. Now, people tend to prefer the Bookerly font. It is the Amazon-made font for reading books. It's the default font, but if you want to choose a different font, you can do that here. Next up, we have the layout options. Now, this is also very useful if you want to read your Kindle in the sideways orientation. This is where you would change that. You can also do things like adjust the margins over here as well. Now, the last tab is the More menu. Now, this is where you'll be seeing more of the advanced options, but I think it's really important that you spend some time going through here because there's some very basic settings that you'll probably want to turn on. Let me explain what I mean by that. The first option we have in the More menu is the Reading Progress section. Now, this is actually a redundant setting. What I mean by that is you close the settings out and simply tap on the bottom left of the screen and just keep tapping there. You can navigate through all the settings that are in that menu option. So instead of having to open up that menu, you can just tap tap a bunch of times and cycle through all the options. Below that option for reading progress is the option for showing the clock on the top of the screen. Again, this is a very basic thing, and it's a very personal preference. If you like to get lost in your books, not knowing what time it is, keep the clock turned off. But if you're like me and read at night and have to make sure you sleep on time, make sure the clock is turned on. The rest of these options are again personal preference, but I'll show you what I'm doing for mine. The next option over here is for book mentions. If you're reading a book and the author recommends a book for someone else, it'll actually highlight that and give you the option of going to that book page in the Amazon store. This actually does not work very well for me. I don't think I've ever seen this in practice, but hey, it's there as an option. Below that, we have another option over here for about this book. If you have this turned on, every time you open up a book for the first time, it'll give you a little synopsis of the book, a little menu option. You also have the toggle there for adding it to your Goodreads right away. So I like to keep this on because every time I open a book up, I want to start it and put it on my currently reading shelf. Next up, we have popular highlights. This is also something that's really helpful if you want to see what the most popular passages are while you're reading a book, things that people are highlighting. This is really, really nice to see the key points, especially if you're lazy and don't want to highlight yourself. This is a great little shortcut for that. This next toggle is a very simple one as well, the highlight menu. Every time you highlight something on your Kindle while you're reading, a little menu option comes up asking if you want to look it up in the dictionary or add a note or anything like that. If you have this turned on, that menu will come up every single time. If you have this turned off, every time you highlight, nothing will come up. It won't ask you anything. It'll simply highlight what you said and then move on. The next option over here is only available if you have the Kindle Paperwhite from 2021. And this is really important because it requires this new e-ink screen that they're using compared to the older models. The options for page turn animations, I love these a lot. It makes reading so much more fun compared to not having any animation at all. So if you have this option, I would encourage you to turn it on. It also allows you to see which direction your pages are turning. Without this option, sometimes you go back a page by mistake when you thought you went forward. It gets a bit confusing. The animations help with that. The next option below this is for word wise. This is actually really cool, especially if English is not your native language. You can turn this on. It'll actually give you definitions, not really definitions, but explanations for most difficult words while you're reading a book. So if there's a word that tends to be unfamiliar for a lot of people, the Kindle will know that and give you a little synopsis of what that word means above the word. This is really, really cool. Even if you speak English fluently, if you're reading a very complicated book, this might be a great way to understand the book better. I actually only discovered this very recently and it's very useful. Now that was the AA menu. The next option we have over here is for the chapters. Now this is really useful because if you want to quickly navigate to a certain chapter, you can do that in this menu. And you can also go to the Notes and Highlights tab at the top and see all your notes and highlights compiled into one central location. And a pro tip, if you scroll to the bottom of that Notes and Highlights tab, you can export your notes and email them to yourself. Next to the Chapters menu, we have the Bookmarks menu. If you want to add a bookmark while you're reading, you can add as many bookmarks as you like. Simply tap on the top right corner while you're reading a book and that bookmark will be added. It does get a bit buggy at times where you have to press the bookmark a couple times, but it does work. I actually use this feature all the time, every single morning on my Kindle that I use especially for my morning prayers. I have a PDF file on there and I bookmarked every section of the PDF so I can quickly navigate through it. Next we have the search menu, which I won't really talk about much. It's simply a search menu. The next to that we have the 3 dots. There are a ton more options under these 3 dots. The first one over here is about this book. So if you want to read more about this book like we talked about before, this is where you would do that. Next up, we have the notes and highlights option, which is the exact same thing I showed you before, just another way to get to that. And below that, we have the vocabulary builder. Every single time you look something up in the dictionary, it actually saves that word to the vocabulary builder and makes a flashcard for you, which is really, really cool. If you go to the vocabulary builder, you can do a quick review of all the vocab that you've been looking up in the dictionary. Now, one more setting I want to call out in this menu is the disable touchscreen button. This is actually very useful if you have the Kindle Oasis or any Kindle with page turn buttons. If you don't want to keep pressing the screen by mistake, you can disable the touchscreen completely and just use the buttons instead. But if you have a Kindle that requires touchscreen, you probably don't want to touch that button. One more thing I want to show you while we're inside a book over here is how to highlight while you're reading. I love to highlight things while I read. It's something I rely rely on to take notes. This is why I bought a Kindle, because I was sick and tired of carrying a notebook around with me. I simply highlight all the important things and leave short notes using the keyboard on the screen. To highlight something on your Kindle, simply tap and drag on a sentence or passage or paragraph or a whole page, whatever you want. You'll highlight the whole thing, which is so cool. Then afterwards, like I talked about, the menu comes up and you can add a note if you'd like. Now, typing on the Kindle keyboard is not the best experience. I always make typos. Don't be annoyed at yourself if you do that. Just be aware that the keyboard isn't the best and you'll be making mistakes. Just do your best. Now, if you don't want to highlight something, but instead look something up in the dictionary, it's actually very easy. Simply tap and hold on a word, and you can actually navigate the dictionary definition as well as the Wikipedia page for it. Now, another very important screen that you'll probably be seeing a lot on your Kindle is the Quick Actions menu. The way you access this is by swiping down from the top of the screen. It's very similar to what you might do on your phone to access some quick settings. Over here, we have things like the time, the date, your battery percentage, then also some options that you can choose from. Now, the first option we have over here is for airplane mode. Now, if you have a Kindle that's a bit old, or maybe you read a lot, having airplane mode turned on is actually very beneficial. It'll extend the battery life of your Kindle by a lot. However, if you have airplane mode turned on, it will also disable all the syncing and cloud syncing features of the device. Now, in my book, Supercharge Your Reading, chapter 1 is all about using the Kindle ecosystem. I'm a big believer of not just using your Kindle, but using multiple devices with the Kindle app installed. With airplane mode, you're not going to be able to sync the pages that you've read across all your devices, as well as your highlights and notes. So don't use airplane mode unless you have severe battery issues. Below the airplane mode button, we have an option to sync. If you want to force a sync, maybe you're reading on a different device and the pages haven't sunk over yet, you can press this button. It'll do a quick connection to the cloud and bring that down to the Kindle. Next to that, we have the Bluetooth option. All Kindles do have support for Bluetooth. If you want to connect a speaker for Audible books or some Bluetooth headphones like your AirPods, you can do that as well. Next, we have an option for all settings, which we'll be talking about later on, as well as the option for dark mode. Dark mode is very cool. If you want to invert the colors of your Kindle while you're reading from white screen to black screen, it actually makes it look a lot nicer if you're into that. I don't like it personally. I always like having it on the default setting, but I know there are people out there who really prefer this. Below all these options, we have two more sliders to choose your brightness and your warmth. Now, the warm light temperature control is only available on the new Kindle Paperwhite as well as the Kindle Oasis. I do believe this will be a standard feature moving forward, but if you want that, make sure you have a newer Kindle. I strongly encourage having a Kindle that has that. It makes reading on this device so much nicer. And the brightness control is also very helpful. It makes a big difference when you're reading at night, especially. You don't have to worry about keeping the light on. Just set up the brightness the way you like it and you're good to go. Another very quick setting I want to talk about has to do with the power button. Now, I don't recommend powering off your Kindle every single day. Simply tapping on the power button once and having it go to sleep is more than enough. It will last for a long time in sleep mode. But there are times where you may want to power it off completely or restart your Kindle if it's acting up. The way you do that is simply pressing and holding on the power button and waiting for the menu to appear on the screen. Now, you will see the power off and restart options, but you'll also see another option over here for turning off the screen of your Kindle. If you don't like the screensaver, you can simply press this button and it'll make a completely blank screen on your Kindle, which is really clean. Now, going back to the library tab in the home screen of the Kindle, right on the top, you're going to see a giant search bar. This is where you can search for things that you're already owning on your Kindle, like books that you've purchased, or you can search for books that you haven't quite yet purchased either. It's kind of like a universal search bar. Next to the search bar, you have the Kindle store. Now, if you really wanted to, you can go into the Kindle store on your Kindle and buy books directly from there. Now, I don't like using this because the Kindle store on the Kindle is a bit of a clunky experience. I actually prefer buying all my Kindle books on the computer than having them delivered to my Kindle over Wi-Fi. When you buy a book on the computer, at the end of the purchase, it'll ask you, do you want to deliver your book to your Kindle. You just press that button. The next time your Kindle is on Wi-Fi, it'll just pop up right away on the home screen. It works so seamlessly and it's so much easier than buying books directly on the Kindle. Now, next to that store icon, we have a 3-dot menu again. Now, this is where a lot of important stuff is. Now, I'm going to skip the first one for reading lists because I never use that, but I do use Goodreads quite a bit. Goodreads is basically a social network that's owned by Amazon for bookworms. It's a great place to track all the books that you're reading, want to read, or have already read. In my book, Supercharge Your Reading, I talk about this quite a bit in detail about how I use Goodreads. I also have several videos on this topic. Below Goodreads, we have Amazon Kids. Now, if you have a Kindle Paperwhite Kids edition, you may be familiar with this already. Amazon does have a kids version of their Kindle experience, so if you want to use that, this is where you would do that. They also have a kids subscription if you're interested, just for kids books as well. Below that, we have the web browser. The web browser on a Kindle is the last thing I'd recommend anyone to use. It's great for really, really quick lookups for things that you may have to use, maybe a link in a book or something like that, but I would never recommend using this for anything more than that. It is such a slow experience and pages just don't load the way you would want them to. It's very, very funny to see actually how annoyingly slow it is. The last thing I want to talk about is the settings option that we have over here, which is quite detailed. We're going to go through every single setting on the Kindle so you know exactly how it all works. The first menu I want to talk about is actually not one of the menus, it's the 3 dots again on the top right. The 3 dots over here will allow you to have some quick options for restarting your Kindle. You can also reset it and access your device info. But one thing I do want to call out is the update your Kindle button. Most Kindles will actually update on their own once an update is released, but sometimes the update will just be pending, and if you want to manually force the update, this is where you would press that button. Now, the first option we have over here is for your account. This is where you can do things like change the device name. You can even add a device description if you want, even more detail than just a name. You also have other options over here like social networks. Now, Kindle did used to support a direct connection with Twitter, but that's no longer there. Now, the only social network that comes up is Goodreads. So this is where you would go and log into that if you wanted to. You also have a few other options over here. If you want to completely remove your Kindle from your Amazon account, you press the deregister button over here. That's how you do that. And lastly, we have the option over here for send to Kindle. This is a very advanced feature that I have a whole video talking about. But if you want to email things to your Kindle, that's the email address that you need for that. Below the Your Account section, we have the Household menu over here. If you live in a house with multiple Amazon users, you can actually share your books across your entire household, which is really convenient. So your spouse or your kids don't have to buy the same books that you may already own and vice versa. So if you have a family that likes to read, this could be a very useful feature. Next up, we have the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth options over here. Again, very, very straightforward. You can connect to a Wi-Fi network over here. This is also where you can enable Bluetooth and connect your headphones or a speaker for Audible books if you want to do that. I don't like doing that on my Kindle. I prefer using Audible on my phone and using my headphones that way. But if you wanted to have a Kindle just for audiobooks, you could do that directly on here. Next up, we have my favorite menu, which is device options. The first menu we have over here under device options is for display cover. If you have this display cover feature turned off, you're gonna see a regular screensaver every time you put your Kindle to sleep. Now, you may not even see this setting if you have something called special offers on your Kindle. If you didn't get the advertisements removed when you bought your Kindle, when you put your Kindle to sleep, you're gonna see ads on the screensaver. So only if you remove those special offers will you have this option for display cover. When you enable the display cover option, instead of seeing a screensaver, it's actually going to show you the book cover of the last book that you're reading on the screensaver. This makes your Kindle feel so much more like an actual book instead of a Kindle, and I really, really do appreciate that. But again, you have to pay the extra money to remove the ads from your Kindle. But if you live outside of America, you may actually have no option for that at all. So it depends where you live, but in America at least, they make you pay $20 extra for that. Below display cover, we have another option here for device info, which is very convenient, but you probably won't ever be using that. Next up, we have the warmth schedule, which is very useful if you have a warm light temperature control. If you want the warm light to activate based on the sunrise and sunset, or setting up a custom time, this is where you can do that. Next up, we have device passcode. If you have people in your family who like to go and mess with your Kindle and change pages and things like that, you can actually passcode protect your Kindle, which could be very useful for a lot of people. that is where you set that up. Now there are two more options for reset and restart, which are very self-explanatory, but one hidden option where it depends on the Kindle you have, at least on my Kindle Paperwhite, I don't see this right away. But if I swipe down and scroll down a little more, we have one more option over here for advanced options. In the advanced options menu, we have quite a few more features that you probably want to look at. The first one over here is device time. If you want to change the time on your Kindle, this is where you would do that. Next up, we have home and library. Again, nothing too much over here, just some options for collections and Audible books, how they're being displayed on your home screen. Below that though, we have something called WhisperSync for books. WhisperSync is that technology I was talking about that keeps all your books in sync between multiple devices. You definitely want to keep this turned on. However, there's one important thing I should say. With WhisperSync turned on, Amazon is basically tracking every single tap that you make on your Kindle. If privacy is a major concern for you and you don't want them tracking every little tap that you make and you don't care about syncing your books across multiple devices, then you should turn off WhisperSync because then they can't track all this information on your Kindle. Another option that you'll see over here is Power Saver. Now I've actually turned off the Power Saver feature because with it turned on, every time the Kindle turns on after a few days or several hours even, it just takes a lot longer to turn on. If you turn off the Power Saver, it turns on in a second, and I really like that because I don't like waiting for my Kindle to wake up. The only con to this setting though is it does take up more battery than the Power Saver feature. Power Saver extends the battery by a little bit, but I've had my Kindle Paperwhite now with Power Saver turned off for several weeks, almost a few months now actually, and I have no issues with my battery whatsoever, so just a quick note about that. Next up, we have the privacy option over here. This is also really important. If you don't like Amazon tracking you, you can just turn this off instead, and they won't be able to see your data, but they can still send you ads like recommendations on your Kindle, but they won't be using your personal data anymore to make those marketing promotions for you. So this is really a personal preference. I like turning this off because I don't like sharing all my personal data if I don't have to, but you can keep it on for more personalized recommendations. If you scroll down now, we have one last option for storage management. I don't ever go in here because Kindles take up so little space. Books don't need that much storage unless you're storing a bunch of comic books or audio books that take up a lot of space. You'll never run out of space on a Kindle. But Kindles can hold thousands and thousands of books. You'll never have to worry about it, especially if the cloud is something that just is a non-issue. Going back to the main settings screen now, we have another option for reading options. There are a couple things in here that are worth talking about. The first one is page refresh. Now the Kindle screen is not like your phone screen. They're using e-ink technology. What that means though is sometimes when you turn the page, a bit of a ghost will appear from the previous page onto the next page. This is not very common, but if you are seeing this issue and it's getting very annoying, turn this page refresh on and it'll make sure every single time you turn the page, you'll have that ghosting effect removed. Underneath this option, we also have the vocabulary builder, which is something we already talked about. I recommend keeping this on. There is no harm in having that there. The next setting I want to talk about is for language and dictionaries. Now there's quite a few things in here if you have different languages that you speak or if you're trying to learn a new language. I don't have much experience with this menu, but if you do have a language you're trying to learn, I do recommend trying to read a book in a different language and installing different dictionaries so you can look up the words that you don't know. You can also do things like changing the keyboard over here to different languages. So if you aren't using the US America keyboard, you can very easily change the keyboard to the one that lives in your country. Next up, we have accessibility. The accessibility menu over here does have a voiceover option. This does require having a speaker of some sort connected, but you do have that if you are visually impaired, which is very, very cool. There's also an invert option for colors, which is very similar to the dark mode thing we talked about earlier. Next up, we have parental controls. Now, parental controls are obviously meant for parents who want to use it for their kids, but one thing that I've tried doing before, which actually works really well, is turning on parental controls for myself and disabling the Kindle store. And this is really helpful if you tap on books by mistake on the home screen. It does not allow you to open up the Kindle store if you have that parental control turned on. So that's a bit of a pro tip for you. If you don't like using the Kindle store on your Kindle, just turn it off in parental controls. You'll never have to see it again. The last option we have over here is for help and user guides. Now, I won't really talk about the help and user guides part, but in this menu, we have something for contact us. This is actually really helpful for troubleshooting. If you're having issues with your Kindle, you can reach out to Amazon directly on your Kindle. But what I like to do is something called feedback. You can give feedback to the Kindle team directly on the Kindle for features that you may want to see in the future. This is the only way that I know of to get in touch with the Kindle team. So if you have feature requests for things you want to see, or you're finding things that don't work properly, make sure you contact them through this form and give them your feedback. Now, there is so much more on the Kindle that we haven't quite talked about, but those are the most important things that you should know to get you up and running for using your Kindle. Again, I want to recommend buying my book, Supercharge Your Reading. Link for that down below. I talk about the most important things in more detail, as well as a few bonus tips as well. If you're into more Kindle tips though, I do have a free Kindle video on YouTube with 18 secret Kindle features. Link for that on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.